Well, here we are. After many years, consisting of many pushbacks and delays, Blazing Strike is finally here. So, was the wait really worth it? Well, for those of you that are new to the channel, I think the last full-on fighting game review I've actually done was King of Fighters 15, and so if you haven't seen that, which I'm pretty sure most of you haven't, here's how I go about doing reviews. Usually I go through all the categories that you see on screen right here, I talk about each one, give each one a score, and towards the end when I give my verdict, I'll give my closing thoughts and a final score, which is an average of all the sections together. I want you to take note of the fact that I said this is what I usually do because this review is not going to follow this format. I usually don't give a lot of behind the scenes info when talking about how I put videos together, but I think I need to do this right now. In addition to the fact there's a lot of other fighting game demos and a lot of other material that I want to cover this month, another reason why this is coming out so late is the fact that I had to basically start over. Not the entire thing, but more so, as I've just hinted at, the formatting of this particular review. I had gotten a little over the midpoint of my review, the original one that I did, and as I'm looking it over, I found myself sounding a bit mind-numbingly repetitive, to put it simply. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, but in the meantime, the format is going to be a good old the good, the bad, and the ugly. Or more accurately in this case, is going to be the good, the meh, and the bad. And yeah, that doesn't roll off as well, but hey, that is how we're going to approach this, so let's get right into it. So what is the good, at least in my opinion, when it comes to Blazing Strike? Well, for starters, this is kinda sorta outside of just the game, but I personally do love the limited edition of the game. Somebody had asked what was in the limited edition, and around the time I saw that message, I had gotten it in the mail. And in case you didn't know, I did do a YouTube short about this, revealing what was inside the packaging, and yeah, I love the art book. Trading cards were a nice little touch too, and of course, the soundtrack, which does wrap around into another thing I do love about this game, and that is the music. All around, the music to me is fantastic. When I had first learned that HYPERLAMB was handling the music for Blazing Strike, I went to seek out some of their other music, which you can find on YouTube, Bandcamp, SoundCloud. I'll link everything in the description. And yeah, I love what I heard, and I was expecting the same for Blazing Strike, and on that front, they delivered. A lot of my favorite tracks come, of course, from the story mode, and I even like the fact that there's a slight alteration to the songs when the pause menu is up. I like that as well. I'm gonna end up talking in circles about the music, which is what I don't want to do, but simply put, HYPERLAMB did phenomenal with this game's music. I love it. It makes having the physical soundtrack all the better. And of course, one of the many things that attracted a lot of people to this game, the graphics and the art direction, which overall I think is super solid. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you what they were going for. They were really leaning into that old school arcade fighting game aesthetic, and personally, I do think it looks really good. I mean, there might be a couple of things that are kind of off a little bit, like the perspective when it comes to some of the backgrounds, and of course, I know some people have talked about this before, but the comparison with some of the figures, like the NPCs in the background, in comparison to the playable characters might be kind of off, which I can kind of see that, but it doesn't really bother me all that badly. So like I said, overall, I was pleased with just the artistic look of this game. I know I'm kind of backtracking and I was afraid to go back to it because, again, I could talk all day about how much I love the job that HYPERLAMB did with the music, but the music and the overall art direction and knowing exactly what they were going for, everything there just coalesces very well, in my opinion at least. And that's really all I have to say for this section. So with that being said, let's move right along. So just to be clear, everything in the meh section here are things that I have roughly the same amount of praise and criticism for. You could colloquially call this section the could have been better section, if you will, but just wanted to make that clear. The first thing in Blazing Strike that I feel could have been better is the animation. Now, I don't know how much they took into consideration when it came to a lot of the early critiques when it came to animation, because there were quite a few. There were criticisms that things looked a little bit weird, kind of janky, a little stiff, and I mean, I could see that. Like, I'll just give you one example that always kind of bothered me, and it still does to this day. Jake's throw animation to me is off, more so with the person that he's throwing. Now, when I first saw this and it really bothered me, I just thought it was a matter of how it looked against a larger guy like Alexander. But then as I go and I look into it and I see it in game, I don't know, like, that's the thing. There's a lot of animations that are a little too lickety-split fast and they don't look fluid, if you know what I mean. I know there are probably a couple of others, but some other janky looking animations that bothered me personally were, for one, Nagi's throw. And it's so messed up because in terms of like the concept of it, wonderful idea. But when looking at the character on the receiving end of this throw, no, it looks awful. To further explore this element, I actually popped in Garo Mark of the Wolves and Waku Waku 7 just because those are the two old school fighting games that I tend to pop in every here and there if I just feel like it, and I actually love both of those games to death. And I was looking at them purely in the sense of animation as opposed to me just enjoying them. And yeah, even with some of the kooky weird stuff from like back in the day when this particular craft was still evolving, at least compared to what Blazing Strike did, stuff still looked fluid and it didn't look too weird to where it was kinda hard on the eyes, if you know what I mean. I don't think the animation in Blazing Strike is pure garbage. Again, it's in this section. I just feel like it could have been better. The next thing I want to talk about, I almost put in the good section because I do mostly think that this particular element is fine. It's just there is a nitpick that I have in and of itself with this particular thing, but it does kind of tie into another point I want to cover in this section, and that is the sound design. Again, overall, I find the sound design here to be pretty good. Like, it's going again for that old school feel, so there might be a little bit of clunkiness to some of the sound effects. I think the voice acting overall is pretty solid, except for me personally. The one thing that actually annoys me, and surprise, it's not really the announcer.
Blazing Strike! Let your strikes blaze with fury! Shatter your opponent! Tear each other limb from limb!
The announcer, I think, is okay. Like, I personally find the whole high energy, caffeine fueled hype of this announcer as more of a silly thing than an annoying thing. Like, it kind of reminded me of the announcer from the one Phantom Breaker Omnia trailer.
Oh yes! You want to know what time it is? It's Phantom Breaking time! Oh yeah! Let's go!
It kind of wowed me, but I found it kind of funny in a ways. Like, it's a nice, charming type of weird and goofy and over the top for me, as opposed to something annoying, so it's not the announcer. I think the announcer's okay. The thing that annoys me though is fighting against Graphy because, well... Yeah, that got annoying to me very fast. which is funny because it made me chuckle in the beginning, but after a while, I'm just like, oh, come on, dude. But like I said, this is a nitpick. The matter in which I feel like the sound design could have been better actually wraps into this next thing that I felt could have been better, and that is the story presentation. We'll circle back around to the whole sound design connection a little bit later, but first I want to give what I like about the story presentation. First of all, props to them for actually having story mode and arcade mode separately. I do personally feel like more fighting games need to do this. I do kinda get that devs may feel like it's just better or more convenient to like wrap the two together, but for me, arcade mode is arcade mode. You plug in like your metaphorical coins or your continues and everything, you go up the ladder, you unlock maybe some cosmetics or something, you get an ending that may or may not be canon, and boom. That's arcade mode. Story mode should tell the actual story of this game. I'm sick and tired of revisiting this, but I gotta go back to it. But sometimes you may have characters on the roster that are not involved in the story. You might just have those characters there because they are iconic. It wouldn't be the game without them. You get what I'm talking about. I don't want to go into that. And I'm glad that the story is actually structured differently from arcade mode. I actually really appreciate that. I personally think that more fighting games should do that, unless of course your story is structured where everything that happens with every character's ending is canon, then okay, I get it. I totally get why you would wrap the two together, but I prefer them separated. And I'll admit there's a bit of bias on my part with this particular thing, but I do appreciate the visual novel comic book presentation. I do love visual novels as well, so I was very happy to see this. And I even love that they utilized the 2D style that we see with the gameplay and even had cutscenes done in that style. I'm glad that they utilized all these different art styles to tell the story of Blazing Strike. Now, for the record, when I talk about story, when I review fighting games, I'm mostly talking about the presentation of the story, because at least for me, talking about how substantive, how good the story is, I feel like is a whole nother discussion. Plus, I don't want to spoil anything. But I will say this, I was very much invested in the characters, so I do think that the writing was pretty good for the most part. And like I said back when I did my video going over each character's profile, there is potential for a really interesting and solid narrative with Blazing Strike's story. With that being said, you know what section this particular element is in, so you're probably wondering what are my issues with the story presentation. Rolling back to the whole matter of sound design, the visual novel scenes could have actually been more punchy and engaging to me. The reason why I'm tying in sound design with this is that they could have possibly implemented some voice lines in the midst of some of the dialogue in the visual novel scenes. Like for example, take a game like Danganronpa. Most of the scenes, especially those that are outside of the class trial bits, it's mostly text, but there will be times in the midst of some dialogue where there will be a soundbite of a character saying something at least closely related to what the text is. Like one of my favorite instances is the character Mondo Owada. Whenever he gets ticked off, there's a random soundbite of him saying, "Piece of shit!" And sure, the accompanying text blatantly does not say that, it's closely related to what he is saying. I think Blazing Strike should have had more of that to where these scenes would pop a little bit more. And while I do appreciate the fact that there were different sprites for some of the characters, especially when it comes to switching emotions, I just feel like they could have had a little bit more to them. Like of course, you look at a visual novel like Ace Attorney, there is very minimal voice acting in there outside of like the interjections and such, but people remember a lot of those sprites. Like there's a lot of memorable sprites in Ace Attorney. I feel like Blazing Strike could have included some of that, and perhaps for some people, it would have made these scenes a little bit more enjoyable to get through, because I also remember there being complaints about the text speed, which from what I saw, you can hold down the X button to speed it up, but it's kind of interesting. I have never played a visual novel where they just speed it up a tad bit. There are some VNs that will allow you to just get the whole thing in one press, which also reminds me, unless I did something wrong, it just kind of seems like these scenes just kind of go into autoplay. So for people that really do try to like take in the story and digest stuff, you might not be able to do it. I think that should have been put in like as a quality of life thing, but that is just the visual novel fan in me kind of coming out right here. Speaking of quality of life, another gripe I have with the story presentation in here is the fact that, once again, unless I'm missing something, because I searched thoroughly to make sure I wasn't overlooking anything, but there is no way to save your progress in this mode at all. Like, at all. Pressing start during the scenes brings up nothing, and you could only pause during the fights. And even with that, you still can't save your progress. Even if this mode was like incredibly short, I find that to be unacceptable. Like, come on now, that's a quality of life thing. I have played visual novels that take even less time to finish than the story of Blazing Strike, and even they still have a save option. Funny thing was, I discovered this when I was playing story mode, and I actually had to cut the game off because I had to tend to an emergency involving a friend. And then when I came back, I was surprised to see that they actually started me back at the beginning. So it's like there's not even an autosave on this. Like, that's pretty messed up, to put it simply. Now that I've talked about story mode, let me talk about arcade mode, because it's also kinda meh to me too. On one hand, I do give them credit for trying to add a little something different in an attempt to try to spice up arcade mode, but the stage hazards and the interactables are kind of a mixed bag. This slightly reminded me of those whacked out towers in Mortal Kombat 11, like the very broken ones, but at least from what I've seen, the hazards and the interactables are not as busted, and if anything, they're just more annoying than anything. Additionally, I guess it's kind of a good thing that the hazards also screw over your opponent as well, because I do recall at one point, I think comboing, getting a super off of Mochizuki because of that freaking crane, but yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. Also, another thing that I'm rather ambivalent about when it comes to the gameplay is the fact that every character has only one super. Now, all the supers for the most part that I've seen, they look cool and they function pretty well, at least from what I've seen. However, something about this still felt kinda odd to me. The best way that I could possibly put it, at least speaking for me, can't speak for anybody else, but maybe I have just been spoiled by fighting games from like the past couple decades or whatnot, but with the exception of fighting games where supers are not like prominent or whatever, I'm so used to just characters having more than one super. Sure, of course you can argue that that might have not been the thing back when supers were first being implemented into fighting games, but that's why I specified the time frame that I did. Like, I don't know if this was meant to be another contributor to the old school vibe that this game is going for, but I don't know, it still felt weird. And now that I'm thinking about it, and this isn't scripted, I'm totally spitballing this particular portion because I just thought about it as I'm recording. But having a second super would also add a little extra layer to the character's playstyles. Whether it's a self buff that will allow you to switch up your game a little bit, whether it's another attack / combo super that will give you like another combo ender on certain types of hit confirms, or a unique setup or some shenanigans. And off the top of my head, I'm thinking about stuff like Dormammu's Stalker Flare or Sylvie Palapala's Mecha Haya reboot. You know, stuff like that, just a couple of examples or ideas or whatnot. Because overall, while I can see that having one super can make things a lot simpler and that being a positive, at the same time, it just kind of feels like everything with the characters is a little too streamlined in my opinion. So like I said, I'm just in a very weird place with this element of just the one super. And then of course, the characters. Now, I personally love all the designs. As I've mentioned before, there are designs that I like more than others, but I don't think any of them are particularly bad. And I do think that for the most part, everybody has pretty cool and interesting playstyles. The one big drawback, or the one thing that pretty much wrecks the nature of the characters, honestly, is the very troublesome nature of Blazing Strike itself, which actually leads us into the final section. So in case you haven't figured it out or guessed it yet, it was this section right here that is the reason why I felt I had to reformat this whole review. This is where I felt like I was getting super repetitive in my original review. With this section, there are basically two major recurring things that kept popping up. The first of these two things is something that I'm sure you've probably heard many other creators and players mention in regards to this game, and that is the price tag. The second thing pretty much connects with the first one in something of a 1-2 punch, and that is what I consider to be careless mistakes. Look, I get it. Launch days can be somewhat sloppy, choppy, and hectic for one reason or another. However, the amount of bugs and issues and missing quality of life features for Blazing Strike is flabbergasting to me, and rather frustrating considering the price tag. I am wondering how much and how extensively was this game playtested, because again, I know some things are going to slip through, but there are way too many infinites that were found in this game, and on top of that, most of them are not hard to do. Why am I able to do this with Jake and I'm not even using any meter? Like, I'm pretty sure this was not done by design, and once again, anybody could have stumbled into this. Like, I know when we lab and do stuff in training mode, a lot of the stuff we do is not optimal, it's situational, and sometimes impossible, but come on, this right here should have been spotted, as well as some other infinites, honestly. The fact that people are finding them like crazy is pretty insane, if you ask me. And before anybody says it, I do know that we have basically a burst/combo breaker mechanic in this game to stop stuff like this, but once again, I don't think this was done by design far as like having these infinites. Which, speaking of that mechanic, another thing that is really frustrating about Blazing Strike is the lack of a cohesive tutorial. I don't get why this game does not have this. I don't know if this was an instance of just leaning too far into the whole old school thing, because the tutorials we have nowadays are not like the ones that we saw with most old school fighting games, but come on. This is like an essential, especially given that Blazing Strike is a fresh new franchise. And I know that we're in the information age and the forums and tutorial videos on YouTube are kind of the thing right now, but you shouldn't basically be relying on those things to fulfill this very thing that will help ease people into your game. Speaking of easing into the game, training mode is just not good. Like, the big thing that befuddles me about this is, why would you have a menu to set things up for training mode, but not one to alter or change things after you enter training mode? That is like a standard with fighting games right now, from major games to indie games. Even the re-releases of old school fighting games like KOF 2002 UM, they have that. I don't have to go all the way back to the character select screen to get to the menu that precedes going into training mode to change up something in training mode. I could literally just do that right there on the spot. And I know the version of 2002 UM I'm referring to is a re-release from like not that long ago, but at the same time, the people in Blazing Strike, they love fighting games, and I'm pretty sure they've seen that this is a standard in fighting games right now. Like, we even have it to where we can switch characters right there in training mode without having to go back to the character select, and the only reason that you would want to go to character select is to like pick a skin or a color or something if you don't have that capability in training mode's character select options. Some games do it, some games don't. But this is a quality of life thing. Why do I have to keep going back to the character select just to get to this menu to change something up in training mode? This is something that we see all around with fighting games, which is why I say that this is a careless mistake. And the crazy thing about it is this particular issue is not just a training mode thing, it is also an online thing. Now, me personally, I haven't really had that many issues with the rollback or like online connections when I've played this game. I don't know about anybody else. Please let me know what your online experience about Blazing Strike is in the comments. I like to hear from other people that might have had something different from me. But back to what I was talking about, more missing quality of life stuff. Because why is there not a rematch option with quick matches? Again, why do I have to keep going back to the menu? Why? And then I haven't really done any lobbies yet, but I've caught word that the lobbies have the same issue, which, if that is the case, that is obnoxious. It really is. Again, this is not just some random new innovation that came out last year. It's been a quality of life thing in fighting games for quite a while now. Why is this simple thing not there? It makes no sense to me. Another thing that irked me about training mode is the fact that there's no restart or reset button when it comes to positioning. So like if you push somebody into the corner and you're trying to test out a combo from mid-screen, you'll have to manually push your opponent mid-screen. Same thing for positioning your characters on one side of the screen or the other, like none of that is there. You have to manually do it yourself, which, again, this, at least in my opinion, is unacceptable. What's also unacceptable is the fact that you can only change your controls from the options menu from the main menu. Again, why? So if by some chance you get a button wrong and you're playing through the arcade mode, you have to go to options and change it there and then start back over. Same thing that I mentioned when it came to having to go all the way back out to training mode to change stuff. Heaven forbid you gotta change your buttons because you gotta go all the way back to the main screen. Why? Why, Rare Breed? Oh my god, like, I'm running out of things to say. Like, what were they thinking? Like, in any fighting game mode where you are controlling your character, you usually have the option to change controls right there in that mode on the spot. Whether it's story, whether it's arcade, whether it's training, whether it's survival, like, I can't think of another fighting game where you had to go to the options menu to change your buttons. To change buttons. Like, oh my god. So, recall the two major points I mentioned before going down the list of the bad that this game has. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Blazing Strike has way too many careless mistakes to justify this price tag, and I wanted to not be mind-numbingly repetitive with this, but even with this format, I ended up as such, but hey, we're already through it, let's just keep going. Again, I get that mistakes can happen. Things like infinites can and will sometimes slip through when it comes to fighting games. However, seeing how simple some of these infinites are and just how plentiful they are, I really don't feel like this game was not play tested extensively like it should have. Some people will roll their eyes and dismiss me as just wanting some freebies or handouts, but this game really should have come with some open betas, especially given the many times that this game has been pushed back. There is plenty of opportunities for open betas. I get that they did test it amongst themselves with the staff, but there is a reason for open betas. Many reasons, in fact, but the thing I'm pointing at here is that when you have an open beta, you have a larger pool of players from various different backgrounds of different skill types and the whole nine, and at least with this particular pool of people trying out your game, there is a higher chance for you to catch stuff like this. And it's better to have it because most open betas, they're usually free. So, I mean, if somebody finds like a bug or an infinite or something very obnoxious in an open beta, it's not nearly as grating as finding said things when people put down money to buy the game. Also, before anybody comes at me saying, well, Rare Breed is actually acknowledging and addressing these issues and are going to fix them. That's good. It really is. And you know what? I am confident that these issues will be addressed and fixed as time goes on. However, this brings us back to the price tag. Although I was angry with the fact that I couldn't play the double KO beta, it was a freebie, as the game will also be when it comes around, so not really much lost there. It doesn't really sting that much going through that. It was annoying, but I'm not as mad. Blazing Strike wasn't a freebie fighting game. Blazing Strike wasn't cheap. People paid money for this game. They've been patiently waiting through many years of delays, and yet it is littered with bugs and has a lack of obvious quality of life features. And look, I also even understand that this game was developed solo, and that is highly commendable. Those of you that have been following me covering this game have known that I have been more than willing to give this game some grace, given that it is an indie game. However, this does not extend to, saying it again, careless mistakes. Again, I do commend that many of these issues are being discussed and addressed in the Discord servers and by Rare Breed themselves, but a lot of this stuff was easily preventable. Sure, we live in the day and age of patches and updates that have brought improvement to many games, some of which definitely had very rocky starts, and I could even see Blazing Strike being all the more solid of a game in the future. However, if you're gonna charge $40 off rip for this, you'd better come in with a bang right out the gate. Not perfection, but a bang. I'm always gonna root for indie fighting games because they always tend to bring a unique flavor to the table of the fighting game genre. And from what I've seen, there's a whole lot of love put into these games. Blazing Strike has that potential, but unfortunately, due to some clumsy handling, at least in my eyes, it didn't come all the way through for me. I'm not angry about this, just given how much I anticipated this game, I'm just highly disappointed. My final score for Blazing Strike is a 4.5 out of 10. I really hate to give it such a score, but I can't give it anything higher than that at this point in time. And for those that are wondering, or those who might ask, well, couldn't they possibly just fix everything up and maybe it can make a comeback? Some people are gonna be that patient. Some people are going to be willing to give it a chance, but here's the thing. If there's anything I've learned about gamers in the past while or so, especially when it comes to any game they purchase where they put down money, more than likely they're going to be less forgiving. Because they felt like you waste their money and you waste their time. I hate to say it, I hate to see this. I mean, again, y'all have seen how hype I've been for this game, but it is what it is. Let me know what you think about Blazing Strike in the comments below, and until next time, I am the Chris Lotus, signing off. You all take care of yourselves, be safe out there, be cool to each other, and stay cool by staying hydrated. Now that I think about it, the cold weather is coming where I am, but regardless, still stay hydrated. See ya.